Hello, everyone. Hi, dear listeners. Good to have you back. Welcome to episode 2 of Havlicek Stole the Pod. I am your host, Alex Goldberg, and with me, as always, is Dr. Justin Quinn. We're here. We're coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York, where it is gorgeous, lovely, perfect spring day. I'm going to get out and try and enjoy the rest of this Memorial Day weekend. After this, JQ, how are things in Mexico?
Well, I got out of the house for the first time in ages yesterday and found out how much boots cost in Mexico City, which sounds great, except for I don't mean the kind you put on your feet. You gotta be careful where you park.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. Jeez.
It happens. It was my bad. Didn't pay attention.
Well, good luck managing that. I wish you the best. I miraculously have yet to get booted here in Brooklyn, but I'm sure that day will come for me eventually. All right. We got a few things to talk about. We got some news, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about a specific Boston Celtics player. You all probably know him, Jaylen Brown, and what his future on this team looks like, as well as some current stuff about him. But before we get into that, let's jump into some quick hitter news stories. For starters, probably the biggest one, I would say, the Celtics ownership group, led, of course, by Bill Chisholm, has now formalized and submitted their bid in completeness to acquire the Boston Celtics. It seems like it's full steam ahead. They are going to have the money. It's going to get done. And in part, it's going to get done because the ownership group has expanded to Arcelor Middle exec Aditya Mittal, who has invested $1 billion in the team sale. He is now the second largest personal investor and may become the alternate governor. Of course, Wyc Grousbeck supposedly will also be involved as a governor for the team, at least for the next couple of years. JQ, what does this change about who's running the show for the Boston Celtics starting next year and beyond?
Well, I think it means that the Celtics are going to have a little bit more liquidity, which is exactly what you want to hear if you are on team Keep the Core together. Obviously, we're going to talk about it a lot this summer, how they're going to be making moves to save some money. But this might mean that some of the scarier alternative paths that the Celtics might take with little cash liquidity might not be so likely to happen. They could still happen, and we can talk about that. But at least for now, this guy is, providing a lot of revenue, a lot of investment that the Celtics would need, not only just to make this deal legal from the NBA situation, because previously they had too much private equity as an investor, and this eliminates that as a possibility. But now also as the second biggest private investor, he could become the team's alternate governor in the way that Steve Pagliuca used to under the former regime. And with that, he may want a say in how things go as well. So that's something to monitor as well.
Yeah, I'm a little intrigued to see how this changes Wyc Grousbeck's continuing role with the Boston Celtics. I and many others have been a little dubious about how much Wyc will actually exercise significant control going forward, given that, well, he's no longer signing the checks. And that is ultimately the main thing. But, Wyc supposedly agreed to the sale only because they included language in the sale deal in the contract that allowed him to retain a role as governor for, this kind of transition period of 2 to 3 years. With Mittal coming in as a potential alternate governor, I do kind of wonder if that reduces Wyc's influence in those discussions. Ultimately, Bill Chisholm is still going to be signing off on everything. It is still fundamentally him running the team. But as to, whether Wyc is involved, given that, he's at this point a pretty beloved and well-supported owner in Boston, it'll be interesting to see if he retains much control there. In terms of more kind of player-centric news, Jayson Tatum, who again will probably be out for all of next season, but maybe not, but probably, secured his 4th straight All-NBA first team. He joined Giannis, the reigning MVP Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Jokic, and Donovan Mitchell. On the second team, Anthony Edwards, LeBron James, Steph Curry, Evan Mobley, and Jalen Brunson. And the third team featured Karl Anthony Towns, Tyrese Halliburton, a couple of new guys in Cade Cunningham and Jalen Williams, and James Harden making his return to All-NBA. Any thoughts on Jayson Tatum on the first team or any other All-NBA stuff?
Not really. I mean, there are several players that did not make the cut because of the NBA games played cutoff. That's a whole other discussion I don't want to get into. But I think Jayson Tatum is properly ranked, and you can make the case that maybe Steph or LeBron are a little higher than you might expect for some legacy purposes. But they should be on a team, if not second team.
Yeah. Jayson Tatum, I think, is assuming he comes back to 90% of what he was, let's say, prior to his Achilles injury. I think this is probably going to be a nice little streak of Jayson Tatum making all NBA teams on seasons where he's healthy. He's now made 4 in a row, and he was the best player at his position this year prior to getting hurt. I think that's pretty uncontroversial at this point. If you consider Jayson Tatum to be the kind of prototypical small/power forward, this is pretty much the best player at this position this past year. As far as LeBron and Steph, yeah, I have no problem with them making second team, especially with the games played stuff. LeBron was awesome this year, even if he kind of stopped playing defense, which he really hasn't done in 3 years. He was incredibly consistent, probably the Lakers' most consistent player throughout an incredibly tumultuous season. He deserved it. Steph Curry, I think, same deal. Outstanding season from Steph. He can't kind of do the regular season grind in the same way that he was able to before, but he's still one of the most dangerous players in the NBA. I think the thing that is most interesting to me is looking at this third team with Cade Cunningham and Jalen Williams both making it. So Cade obviously made a huge jump this year, was a big part of why the Pistons made the playoffs, for the first time in God knows how long. I think it was for a while. And they were somewhat competitive, unlike the previous Pistons playoff team that got mercilessly slaughtered by LeBron's Cavs. And then, of course, Jalen Williams, which might have some implications for Oklahoma City, who does have to pay him this offseason. Now that he's an all-NBA guy, I don't know the exact contract minutia, but, I think the Thunder, at least you and I think, are a pretty safe bet to win the title here. But this core is about to get a good deal more expensive, both this year with Jalen Williams and next year with Chet Holmgren. Anything jump out to you about those two in particular?
Not those two in particular, but I am happy to see that Halliburton made it and didn't have to play on a janky hamstring to do it because he's looking great in the postseason, and it would look pretty bad to have someone playing as well as he has been not on one of those teams.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Moving on to all defense team. Unfortunately, no Boston Celtics made the all defense team this year, including perhaps most notably Derek White, who I think a lot of people thought was at least going to make second team. He did not. Instead, first team, Evan Mobley, Dyson Daniels, Lou Dort, Draymond Green, and Amen Thompson. And second team, Ivica Zubac, Jaren Jackson Jr., Jalen Williams, Toumani Camara, and Rudy Gobert. JQ, first general thoughts on the all defense teams. Do you agree with these choices? Do you disagree with them? What do we got?
I don't really see Lou Dort as first team. I think he belongs, but maybe first team's a little bit high. And if we were going to make the argument for anyone to be cut, I could easily see Toumani taking the place, or Derek taking the place of Toumani. But I don't have a problem with the way this is ranked. I mean, it does seem weird that there are no Celtics on here. You could also make the case that Jayson Tatum deserves as much as anyone to be on there based on how he defended last season. But I don't have any major bones to pick with this list.
What's tricky about Derek White is, he's an outstanding shot blocker. He's been a really good defensive guard for now multiple years. I think, many players in the league would say that Derek White is one of the best defensive guards in the NBA. The challenge, at least I think for some voters, is that Drew Holiday is also one of the best defensive guards in the NBA. And, I think you can even now make a credible argument that given the positional flexibility, the fact that Drew can guard like 1 through 4 and even some 5s, there is an argument that Derek White might not even be the best defender on his own team. I'm not sure I agree with it, but that argument is out there. And I think that to some degree might have hurt both Drew and Derek in kind of cannibalizing each other's votes a little bit, trying to figure out who is the best defender on this team. Whereas if you look at the rest of this list, for the most part, every guy on here is the best defender on their team. Pretty clear cut, like Mobley, Dyson Daniels, Draymond, Amen Thompson, Kamara, Jaren Jackson, Zubats, Gobert. Those guys are all clear cut the best defenders on their team, no question. Jalen Williams and Lou Dort are intriguing. I think Oklahoma City has a historically great defense, and so they deserve representation on the all-defense teams. I'm not upset with the idea that they should have 2 guys on there.
No.
I
would flip them, but yeah.
I would maybe flip them as well. I think Lou Dort is an astonishingly good defender.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jalen Williams has some positional flexibility that is pretty unrivaled on that roster, but I don't know. I'm largely fine with this. I think Derek White, you could make a credible argument that he should be second team, but this is a very tough list to crack. This is arguably the hardest set of awards to crack this year, I think. There's a lot of great defenders, so it is what it is. The Celtics will save a little bit of money in $250,000 as Derek White does not get a bonus. It's pretty inconsequential, but everything matters.
I mean, it's going to be like a couple $1 million once you factor in the repeater tax, but
I guess that's true.
Baseline, it doesn't make much of a difference.
One player who thinks that Derek White is a pretty good defender is LeBron James, who has another episode of his podcast out, this time with Steve Nash, who maybe, I guess, is in line to be a head coach after this season is over, if the early returns on LeBron James podcast are to be believed. But on Mind the Game, he mentioned something interesting regarding the Boston Celtics, and that's that they sometimes get bored with their kind of level of play and dominance in some games, that they kind of stop playing their best basketball, in part because they'll take like a big 20-30 point lead on teams and be like, all right, well, let's get this over with. Any truth to this based on what you've seen from this year?
I mean, have you been watching Celtics basketball for the last half decade? Thank you, Captain Obvious. I'm glad he said it, because maybe they'll listen more hearing it from him, but maybe not, because it's hard not to be bored when you are bored.
I think that's right. And I think LeBron probably knows something about being so dominant that you get bored, given that he has been doing that for about 20 years now and has been largely bored for entire regular seasons at this point in his career. I can see it. I think, Jaylen and Jayson have been through so many postseason wars at this point that it wouldn't shock me if they were like a little tired of, rolling up to, say, play the Washington Wizards in a regular season game. But I think that's a big part of Joe Mazzulla's coaching philosophy, which is, embracing the process, embracing the detail, making sure that you don't get bored by the process. And, I think it ebbs and flows. I don't think it always works. I think that's the case with most coaches in the NBA. But I guess I'm glad that Joe recognizes that and should be able to, in theory, implement it. I do think boredom is part of it. I ultimately think, and I've said this over and over again, there are just times where Boston just starts missing threes, and some of those looks are good. Some of those looks are not good, but they get kind of stagnant about just like hunting for threes in a way that sometimes derails their own process. I'm not sure if that's boredom or literally just missing shots. And I don't know that there's an obvious way that I could tell watching games, but maybe it is. I do think ultimately the greatest challenge that the Boston Celtics experience is simply like missing shots, for lack of a better word. They play such a high variance style of basketball that like they can go on these crazy runs of missed shots, and I'm not sure if that's boredom, but maybe. In terms of transactional news, or rather lack of transactional news, Mark Stein reporting that the Dallas Mavericks are at least exploring the possibility of trading for one Drew Holiday. In our last episode, we talked a little bit about possible offseason moves for Boston. Drew Holiday is a popular candidate to get moved just because of his gigantic salary hit. I think many people in Boston would love to keep Drew included, but he's probably the most likely big salary to get shipped out in some ways. So the Mavericks might be interested. This would be very complicated given that Drew is making $104 million over the next 3 years. Dallas is also reportedly interested in Lonzo Ball and maybe Chris Paul as well. Both of those guys would probably be a little more budget friendly for Dallas. What do we think about the feasibility of Drew Holiday to the Dallas Mavericks, Boston's former finals rival?
I actually think it's pretty feasible, just because, for better or worse, we can, debate the wisdom of the Luka deal forever, but they are planning to win now with a player who probably only has 2 to 3 years left of high-level playing ability in Anthony Davis. Maybe less, maybe more, you never know, but it's not going to be much. And that aligns with that contract. They're going to have a lot of money tied up, and that's a whole other conversation you want to have. Do you really want to have 3 max-ish level guys? Kyrie, assuming he's going to be backing with the team moving forward as well. I don't see how you could put together a championship level team without him coming back and being at least most of what he used to be before the injury, which was already starting to decline. But the other people that they have been talking about that was mentioned in that report, Chris Paul, I mean, he's going to be 40, and at some point the game is going to start slipping more than it already has, which it has. And the other name, which is, again, more attainable, as pointed out by Stein, would be Lonzo Ball. But again, you're looking at another guy who's been dealing with some pretty serious injury issues and has not really shown that he can stay on the floor. So do you really want to put all your eggs in that basket? I think if you're going to pick one of those 3 options, it's pretty obvious. If you're really serious about pursuing titles, it's going to be Drew. There might be better options out there. I am not going to advocate for the Dallas Mavericks on this podcast, but of those options, that's the obvious choice in my opinion.
There's a few kind of interesting wrinkles to this as a possibility. For starters, Drew has some experience playing with Anthony Davis. They were fairly successful in their brief time together in New Orleans. So there is some existing chemistry there. For me, what's most interesting on the Dallas side is the idea of trading for Drew Holiday on Cooper Flagg's rookie contract. I think everything that we've seen suggests that Dallas is not trading the number 1 overall pick. They're going to draft Cooper Flagg with that pick. And that makes sense. And to me, that's interesting because it almost suggests that in the CBA second apron era, a strategy that teams might start employing is trying to win titles with centerpiece players on their rookie contracts. You do see that right now with the Oklahoma City Thunder pretty aggressively team building around Chet Holmgren's rookie deal. In this case, you would see that around Cooper Flagg on a rookie contract. This is kind of more of an NFL model to some degree, where you see teams going for big swings while they have star quarterbacks on rookie deals. And I think you could start to see, particularly now in the modern NBA, more of that happening, knowing that, if Dallas has any sense at all, which we'll see if they do, they're going to have to pay Cooper Flagg a lot of money over the course of the next few years. And maybe with Nico Harrison in charge, they won't do that. But the idea of going all in and playing a super aggressive game while Cooper Flagg is on his rookie contract is kind of intriguing to me. For Boston, the players coming back in this deal, it would be a little tricky for sure. I think it's one where there would potentially need to be a third team involved as a salary dumping ground, maybe a Brooklyn Nets or something like that. And Boston would almost certainly have to send out some draft equity in order to make this go through.
Yeah,
you're not going to be able to say dump Maxi Kleber on the Brooklyn Nets without giving them a pick or some other stuff in order to make that happen. Players that could be involved that Boston might have an interest in, Daniel Gafford would obviously be a primary name here if you're assuming that Kristaps Porzingis is probably not coming back to Boston next year. Gafford as a starting level center at least for a year or so, would probably make a lot of sense for Boston, and then figuring out what to do with him after. A couple other guys that might be worth, kind of snooping around. Omax Prosper, who has had flashes as a kind of capable depth wing. This guy to look at. And then, I don't think that the Dallas roster is loaded with bench pieces or with depth pieces that Boston would be super interested in, but there's a couple of young guys on that team that they could look into as well. Just kind of running down the roster.
PJ Washington as a potential target as well. I think that would require even more draft capital.
Yeah, I would have a hard time seeing that. I think that would be somewhat challenging for them to pull off, just because PJ Washington is, he's expiring, but he is a very good starting caliber power forward. Now, maybe if you're looking for a Jayson Tatum stopgap for a year, you could.
That's where my mind is going with this.
But yeah, we'll see. Najee Marshall had a nice little playoff run. He's a guy to keep an eye on. Jaden Hardy, kind of fine depth shooting guard, has shown flashes, has never really put it together in a full season, has had some injury issues, but those are guys to look at. But any deal involving Drew would almost certainly have to start with Daniel Gafford and at least one of PJ Washington, Najee Marshall, and then probably, looking at this roster, the math is going to get pretty hard on this one. It might even have to involve Klay Thompson by default, but something to think about. On to basketball that is currently being played. The Minnesota Timberwolves and the New York Knicks both bounced back to take one game in their respective series. Both series are now at 1-2. The Pacers and the Thunder leading with 2 wins. Could either of these teams come back to win their series? Which do you think is more likely?
Technically speaking, of course, it's possible for both of them to do so. I think it's not a very wild thing to say that Minnesota can probably extend the series another game or two, but I think that's probably their ceiling. It is definitely very possible for the Knicks to come back and win this series despite having gone down 0-2. If, for example, Aaron Nesmith's ankle or whatever that was injury in Game 3 was as bad as it looked, then that could be a really serious problem for them on both ends of the court. However, if he's healthy, I'm still leaning pretty heavily Indiana at this point.
What's weird about that Knicks Pacers series is, there's a lot of things that are weird about that series, but the Knicks, kind of did the thing that they've been doing all postseason, where the Pacers got up a huge 20-point lead. It looked like they were ready for the knockout blow, and then the Knicks kind of chiseled away. Karl Anthony Towns basically saved their season when Jalen Brunson got into foul trouble. And yet, the Pacers have done this thing where they've dropped Game 3 in every series that they've played so far, regardless of whether they were the home team or the road team in that series. And then they storm back and win Game 4 and Game 5, because the Pacers have shown, more than anything this postseason, that they are excellent on the road. They're just really, really good at winning games on other teams' home court. I did not see a lot from the Knicks to inspire long-term confidence that they are going to win this series last night. To me, it felt like a little bit of a fluky comeback, and I know that the Knicks are very good at doing exactly that, and then they win the game, and then it's like, all right, well, fluky comeback or not, they're back in the series. I don't think anyone's debating that. I will say, for the Knicks fans that were outside my window getting pumped up about last night, I completely understand why. Good luck, fellas. Would not count the chickens yet. Pacers are very, very serious, and they can absolutely win these next 2 games. For Minnesota, I just kind of don't see it. I think that the Wolves got a win at home. I think that they did what they were supposed to do. They might be able to get another one. It was a blowout win for context, like won by 40 points, and kind of thoroughly dominated both ends of the game. To me, that strikes me as a pretty classic shooting variance game. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the Wolves will grind out another win and tie this thing up. I have said for basically the whole season after the All-Star break that the Oklahoma City Thunder look like the best team, and barring anything particularly surprising, I think they're going to win the title. And I think that Minnesota is not going to stop them from doing that, but they could extend the series a little bit. Let's get into some other more Celtics-y related stuff. So the main focus of this podcast and the thing that we want to talk about the most is the Boston Celtics are going to be without Jayson Tatum for next year. And as such, they're going to, and I think we agree on this, barring something pretty shocking, they're going to be relying on Jaylen Brown to be the leader of this team heading into next year. Speaking of Brown, he mentioned that surgery is still an option for his partially torn meniscus, which he sustained throughout the end of the regular season and the playoffs. This was at a 741 pop-up in which he mentioned, among other things, Boston is his home and he plans on staying there through the summer, which is somewhat unusual. Jaylen usually likes to get away from Boston.
He's never done that as far as I can remember.
During the summer. Yeah, no, he basically never does that. But the fact that he's staying in Boston, the fact that he's saying Boston is home, sounds like a guy who wants to be here. He also mentioned at his pop-up that the 741, which is the Jaylen Brown shoe brand, that's the shoe that he actually wears on the court, unlike many NBA superstars who will not wear the shoe that buyers will go to, your Nike or your New Balance outlet and get. Jaylen is actually wearing the shoes that you would then purchase if you were to purchase Jaylen Brown's shoe. But I think a little bit more kind of related to what we're going to be talking about for the remainder of this episode. The thing that jumps out to me here is Jaylen Brown pretty clearly wants to be in Boston. If you watch the Celtics documentary from HBO, produced by Bill Simmons, Jaylen is interviewed numerous times. He has had a complicated relationship with the city. I don't think anybody's denying that. I don't think he's denying that. But it seems like a place that he wants to be and wants to be long-term. And I think, again, barring something pretty surprising, I think we both expect that Jaylen is going to be here long-term, both because he's a very good player.
He wouldn't be the first. Yeah, he wouldn't be the first player to have a complicated relationship with the city. I mean, you can go all the way back to Bill Russell and see that's
for sure
not uncommon.
But, I think both because he's a good player and because I think the fans really like him, and I think ownership, Brad Stevens, Joe Mazzulla are all, pretty big fans of Jaylen. And also because, frankly, Jaylen's contract is functionally unmovable in many respects. I think we can expect...
I don't know about that. I think it's more movable than people give it credit for, but it would require a very unique set of circumstances. We could talk about that. But let's not downplay the roots that he has put into this community for his off-the-court stuff as well. I think that speaks volumes about his commitment.
For sure. No, I think that's right. And I think Jaylen has been incredibly active and involved in a number of causes around Boston. Obviously the big one is narrowing the racial wealth gap, but, doing lectures at MIT and Harvard and in general being pretty involved in the kind of broader Boston community is a big thing for him. So let's talk about assuming that Jaylen Brown is going to be on this team for next year in the foreseeable future. Well, all right. I guess let's get this out of the way early, and then we'll take it from there. First, I don't think either of us think Jaylen Brown is not going to be on the team next year. What would it take for that to happen?
Well, it would take a deal that sets Boston up for the future better than it would if he was still on the team. And for that to happen, it would have to be one of the top two players in this current draft, right? And draft compensation and some cap relief, which is not going to happen. But theoretically, if the Spurs or the Mavs lost their minds and wanted to offer something like that, that's what it would take, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's tricky, though, because Jayson Tatum is going to be coming back at the age of 28, presumably, and that's pretty squarely in his title window. I'm not necessarily sure Jayson Tatum would be thrilled at the possibility of the Celtics trading his favorite teammate and the guy who he's been in wars with to go get someone who is 19 years old.
You can always trade Jayson Tatum too in that scenario. Clearly, that is not what either of us and most Celtics fans would want, but there is an argument that might be the best course of action, depending on what ends up happening with his recovery, with their plans for the future, with their liquidity. A lot of different factors could come into play, but I think we both agree, not very likely.
Yeah. I guess the other possibility is they just get an offer for three very good starters who could, in theory, can allow Jayson Tatum to come back to a team that is still ready to contend. And for the financial flexibility, they just take the deal and say, we need to keep Derek White and Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, and this will add to our depth. Again, really don't think that's going to happen. I just think that offer is functionally impossible in a lot of ways. So all this being said, Jaylen Brown is dealing with his own injury. As we mentioned, that he has a partially torn meniscus. He might have to get surgery for that. There's a chance that Jaylen Brown will not see the court for at least a chunk of next season if he ends up getting surgery and the recovery timetable that comes with that. It could be as much as like 6 months. Let's start with that first scenario. Let's say Jaylen Brown does have to get surgery and, has to miss, I don't know, up until maybe like the All-Star break. What are we looking at for the Celtics next year?
We are looking at a lot of faces we have not seen much of, and a lot of faces we have never seen before and probably have never heard of as NBA fans. If you are deep in the college game and overseas, you might start seeing some interesting prospects come through and not stick around if they don't click real quick. You can see a lot of roster churn, similar to, I think it was Brad's first season when they played a total of like 38 or 9, something ridiculous like that, players throughout the entire season. That might be too high, but I remember it was a lot of faces in one season. We would see a lot of different players getting auditioned for future roles as cheap members of the team when the team is back, with the intention of both being bad because you control their own draft pick for the next season, but also for, again, finding that cheap talent.
Yeah, I think the main thing we would expect if Jaylen Brown misses, say, the first half of the next season, is that the Boston Celtics would be a lottery team. I feel pretty strong about that. I think, with Brown and with Derek White and with a bunch of other potentially high quality role players, the Eastern Conference, I don't think is any great shakes heading into next year. I think you can talk yourself into Boston being a mid-level to low-level playoff team with Jaylen Brown healthy and ready to go. But without him, I just don't know where the shot creation comes from. The fact that he's still one of their best perimeter defenders, and they would have to replace him with somebody who is either incredibly offensively limited or who is not as capable and as flexible a defender. I think Boston would have a hard time winning a lot of games next year without him. And if that is the case, I think they would potentially, make moves around their roster to, let's say, push that a little bit further. But in the event that Jaylen Brown either gets surgery and recovers very quickly or doesn't get surgery and is healthy heading into next year, I think that's the more interesting question to both of us. What does this team look like with Jaylen Brown as the number one option?
Oh boy, it depends. Do they try to retool around his strengths, or do they try to use the season to push him into not exactly a Jayson Tatum-like role, but something more similar to what we saw in Game 5 versus the Knicks, with him being heavily, doing the distribution, but still kind of playing more like Jaylen with a more point forward kind of a role?
Yeah, it's interesting because Jaylen Brown is not as physically large as Jayson Tatum, which would make it potentially a little more complicated to be in that point forward role. Typically, if you see players in that role, you're looking at like somebody who is kind of a LeBron James size, right? Who has both the athleticism and the strength and size to kind of be flexible on a position basis, but then also the court vision and awareness to, kind of lead the dance. To me, I almost wonder I'll start with this. If Jaylen Brown is going to be the number one option, he just has to become a better ball handler, flat out. He is still a little turnover prone. He still loses his handle. Teams know that they can, if they attack his handle, that they will be able to force turnovers or get the ball out of his hands quickly before he's had a chance to, probe and kind of soften the defense a little bit. He'll have to improve his handle pretty substantially. But in the event that he does do that, I have seen, and I think we both have seen, flashes of Jaylen Brown having a almost like James Harden light kind of game where he can use his physical strength and his shot making ability to kind of knock defenders off balance, to kind of, get them in compromised positions and then score around that. I do think that another skill that Jaylen Brown probably needs to work on is drawing fouls.
I was just going to say, with a Harden comparison, I mean, he can be a bowling ball like he was from the beginning of his career, but if he's going to take the next step, he has to add some finesse to that.
I think that's right. And I think if you're looking at players like Tyrese Halliburton, at players like Jalen Brunson, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I mean, there's so many players who are going deep into these playoffs and really finding success because they're able to get reliably, 8, 9, 10 free throws a game, if not more. It really does seem like it's one of the most important skills to have as a lead guard in the NBA today, is being able to consistently draw fouls and get to the line and make your free throws. Jaylen Brown has always been a little up and down when it comes to making his free throws. He's gotten better recently, to his credit, but it's always been a little up and down. And I think if he's going to move into the role of being a primary engine playmaker ball handler, which I imagine Boston would like him to do if he's going to be the number one option, the two things that jump out to me that he can improve his game on and could potentially make him a much more dangerous player down the line is ball handling and free throw drawing. If he can do both of those things, I think Boston could be sneaky good next year. If he can't, could get a little tricky. Then you could be looking at a situation where, if let's say Jalen's game stays relatively where it's at, defenses are going to close in on him. They're going to make life a lot harder for him. The shots that he has kind of feasted on, which are, using his strength and size to get into the mid-range and score there, or taking kind of pull-up threes off the dribble, those shots probably aren't going to be there in the same way, knowing that the defense is going to be keying in on him. What do we have to say about, so there's these two paths. There's the Jaylen gets better path, and there's the Jaylen is basically the same guy path. Let's do outcomes for both. Start with Jaylen gets better. He develops his handle, his passing ability jumps up a little bit, and he is able to start drawing free throws reliably. What are we looking at?
Well, I'm going to say this version of Jaylen is Game 5 Jaylen, right? Mm-hmm. So if we have more Game 5 Jaylen next season than not, then this is a team that might challenge for home court, not very strongly, but might challenge for home court, and could make a surprise run into the postseason, maybe even make conference finals. I don't realistically think they'll be much better than that because Indiana will still be a thing. Cleveland will probably still be a thing. Heck, even the Bucks might still be a thing depending on what ends up happening. So there will still be some good teams at the top of the East, even if there will not be a lot of great teams in the middle and bottom of the East to be in Boston's way. So that's why I think they will probably challenge. As far as the other outcome, though, it really depends on what moves they make around the edges, what players they get back. I mean, there's a case, for example, of like if the Celtics finish the season with Kristaps Porzingis still on the roster, they will end up being a second apron team almost certainly, but pending what other moves they make. But if they do, then $30 million comes off the books immediately and sets them up to stay under the second apron for the next two seasons, which, doesn't necessarily align with that first season back with Tatum. But you might also see other moves around the roster being made to save money. Like maybe they try to hang on to Hauser through the summer, but end up moving him into someone's cap space. If there is cap space for him to move into, like he can move into someone's mid-level exception based on the new CBA rules. So there could be some down shifting if Jaylen doesn't become more like Game 5 Jaylen. And they'll be okay too. It's like next season is more about developing talent either way, whether it's more Jaylen or more the depth or both. I think no matter what ends up happening, the small silver lining we're going to see, regardless of how Jaylen changes his game, is opportunities to grow for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach. And I think the big thing that jumps out to me is Jaylen Brown. The one thing that we have consistently praised him on throughout his tenure in Boston is that he is among the hardest workers we've ever seen. I think there's some inherent limitations to his game that we have seen a lot of, but it's not for lack of effort. Jaylen consistently goes really hard in the offseason. He tries his absolute best to come back a more developed and a more skilled player. And for the most part, he has done that. I mean, if you think about where he started his career as a guy who, outside of athletic ability, being able to kind of jump and dunk, really didn't have any offensive game, so to speak of, to now being one of the more versatile combo forwards in the game today. Like, Jaylen's on the 99th percentile in terms of growth curve over the course of his NBA career. He went from being basically an unplayable offensive player to being one of the best two-way wings in the league over the course of the last 7 years. So that's a remarkable development story. Winning Finals MVP, he consistent staple in the All-Star game, occasional All-NBA. It's pretty impressive. So if there's anybody that can expand his game like this, it's probably Jaylen. The context will matter, and it will be interesting to see him operate in a new context without Jayson Tatum there to kind of be that guy. But I am potentially actually pretty excited about the long-term development of Jaylen Brown as a result of this season. Speaking of long-term development, let's close with this. So Jaylen is still on the hook for I think it's like $50 million a year or something like that. A long and very expensive contract. Enough that I think both of us think it's very unlikely that he'll be playing anywhere else for the foreseeable future. But you have to consider, in the second apron era and with the Boston Celtics always, that possibility that he might not be a Boston Celtic for life. What do you think broadly about his future as a Boston Celtic? Is he going to be on this team for the rest of his career? What do you think?
I think it's incredibly unlikely for him to be on this. I mean, one of him or Jayson Tatum could be, and I think it's probably safe to say that it's more likely to be Jayson Tatum than Jaylen. Not just because of the talent level, but also Jaylen is a year older. Jayson and Jaylen both have had injury problems, but I am a little more concerned about Jaylen's long-term ability to rely on his athleticism, with several injuries that point to problems with maintaining that athleticism. And above everything else, really, just the financial constraints kind of demand that at some point there is going to need to be multiple years below the tax. And that almost certainly will require moving on from Jaylen.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would have agreed with you prior to the Achilles tear. And now I think things are a little more up in the air because we have absolutely no idea what Jayson Tatum is going to look like the next time he comes back to an NBA basketball court. We're hopeful that he will come back in the style of Kevin Durant and be largely the same guy that he was. I don't think that's a guarantee, though. Durant is the exception, not the rule, when it comes to Achilles injuries. Now, everything that we've heard suggests that Jayson Tatum is going to make as good a recovery as you possibly can, that they got the surgery early. We've heard ad nauseum about how Sam Cassell the other day was talking about how he's very optimistic. Like, we've heard a lot about how positively this could go. It's still an Achilles injury, and a ruptured Achilles is just never, ever, ever easy to come back from. And I do think Jaylen is going to have a chance here as the number one option to potentially surprise some people with what that looks like in a positive way. And if that is the case, I think we could, when Jayson Tatum comes back, we could be headed for an interesting place of what that relationship looks like. Maybe an incredibly positive one in which Jaylen taking his game up a level leads to Boston being, a fixture for championship seasons to come. Or it could go the opposite way, and we could be asking some challenging questions in the next couple of years.
That's fair.
That being said, again, the thing that it comes back to me for is the relationship with the fans is substantial. Jaylen has worked really, really hard, not only to become a better basketball player and to become a fixture of the NBA largely. He's worked really hard to ingrain himself in the Boston community. You see that with, the business stuff. You see that with his, attempts to kind of narrow the wealth gap in Boston. You've seen him be a little bit more visible and vocal in media stuff lately. And you can tell that being a Boston Celtic means a lot to him. With this in mind, I think, and the fact that the work ethic is there, right? That he for whatever you can say about Jaylen Brown, you can't say he's not trying really hard every time. I do think that is going to matter as far as his long-term future in Boston is concerned. It may be the case that the CBA just makes it impossible to keep him and Jayson on the same team forever. That's a real possibility, but I think it would be really, really hard to move that guy and not get some serious blowback from Boston fans, particularly as a new and untested owner. I think that would be a big challenge.
Not happening soon, regardless.
No, definitely not. Regardless, I think what we can say is that next season and potentially for the foreseeable future, Jaylen Brown is going to be a Boston Celtic. And I think there's some pretty exciting possibilities that come with that. And I'm somewhat optimistic that if he's healthy and if he's able to stay healthy, that we could see that come to fruition as early as next season. A season without much expectation, but with potentially a lot of interesting possibility. That's pretty much all that we have for this episode. JQ, let's close with this. So the Boston Celtics have been eliminated. Their offseason has started. The playoffs are still going, though. What's something about the NBA generally, either, what's happening with the teams that are still alive or what's happening with the teams that have been eliminated, that you are going to remember, or something you'd like to forget about what's going on?
Well, this is going to be kind of both, honestly.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon when teams are pretty talented to lean very heavily on their best players. I mean, look at Tom Thibodeau. It's been his blessing, it's been his curse. In the case of the Celtics, a particular player who got kind of forgotten in the shuffle, even though I think it was a lottery pick, if I'm not mistaken, he was very highly regarded regardless, never really saw the light of day in Boston and eventually ended up getting shipped out and saving perhaps the Indiana Pacers by making, I think, 5 3-pointers in one quarter. I think it was an NBA record for that beat.
Not just in one quarter, it was in like 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, Aaron Nesmith, absolute sniper. I really want to forget that we traded him away, but I'm glad to see him doing well in his new home.
Of course, it does have to be said that without trading Aaron Nesmith, we probably would not have gotten Drew Holiday down the line. But I, in general, agree. I've been very impressed with Nesmith this year. Really, for the past couple of years, he's developed into an excellent player. And my take that he was better than Malcolm Brogdon a season ago is vindicated. So there.
What about you?
Yeah. So for me, I think I actually have something that I want to forget, and that is the state of NBA fandom discourse on the internet. Guys, listen, it's all fun and games. I know you want to watch your favorite team succeed. You want to celebrate your players when they do well. And I'm totally fine with offering criticism for coaches, players, etc. When it is warranted. That's part of the discourse. It's always going to be part of the discourse. I have no issues with that. Seems like things are getting pretty nasty and pretty personal in a way that's really not great. Are
you saying you're not into people dumping trash on a player or a fan wearing Indiana Pacers jerseys?
Yeah, it's that
much. Yeah,
it's a bit much. And I think also just like the level of vitriol and antagonism that on the internet, and I'm speaking mostly on the internet, that opposing fan bases have towards each other. Listen, guys, it's not that big a deal. And I've been guilty of doing stuff like this. Sure, you've heard my tirade about the Miami Heat. Like, it's a whole thing. But like, is it really worth your time to like go out of your way to accuse an opposing fan base or a person in an opposing fan base of being the worst kind of people in the world? And I'm not going to get into the specifics, but go on the internet, you'll find it. It's tiring, and it's kind of, what do you get?
Because they're not a monolith, no matter how much you want them to be. Some of the voices can be particularly loud and of a particular type, but that is not a monolith. Yeah.
I guess the thing that it feels like there's not any like point to it. Like, why are you burning your time thinking about this or doing this? I guess that's my question. But whatever, that's going to be the case for as long as NBA fandom exists. I just feel like this postseason has been weirdly toxic in a way that I kind of can't put my finger on it. Anyway, is what it is. Be nice to each other. Don't be assholes online, guys. Don't be assholes in real life either. But it's fine. Let's go C's. And we will talk about this a little bit more in coming weeks. Just as a heads up, we're still kind of building the plane as we're flying it with Havlicek Stole the Pod. There's going to be kinks to work out. We're going to, have people coming in and out, and it's going to be fine. We'll make it work. But until next time, thanks for listening to another episode of Havlicek Stole the Pod.